I believe that we can all work together to reclaim our title of best city in the world. Vancouver has elected its first Chinese Canadian mayor.
Vancouver businessman Ken Sim has won that city's mayoral race over incumbent Kennedy Stewart by a commanding margin. Sim lost to Stewart in the last election by fewer than 1,000 votes. The leader of the newly formed centre-right ABC Vancouver party has committed to reducing crime and wait times for building permits. We're joined now by CBC's Susana De Silva, who is in Vancouver. Susana, this victory by Ken Sim was part of a lot of changes we saw in this year's municipal elections.
That's right. There certainly was change in the air last night. There were a lot of voters who went out to vote yesterday wanting to see a different mayor, different members of council, and they voted that way, and those were the results. Not only did we see the incumbents lose in Vancouver and Surrey, but a number of other municipalities in Metro Vancouver, Fraser Valley, and across the province, places like Maple Ridge, Langley City, West Vancouver, White Rock, Saanich. And that list goes on. People were clearly dissatisfied. They went out, voted that way, and sent those incumbent mayors who normally are able to take advantage of being the incumbent, of that name recognition, that people know who they are when they walk up to that polling station. But for a lot of those mayors, that did not work in their favor yesterday. There were a couple of issues for a lot of them. Obviously, each city has its own particular issues, but for a lot, it was those mayors who have come in now who are campaigning around crime, around issues of policing, as well as mayors who went out, who are on councils that were maybe seen as not functioning well, that maybe they didn't get along with other council members. Those mayors went out. Now, some of the ones who have been voted in aren't quite what maybe some people were expecting. I was speaking to a political scientist earlier who talks about the fact that Vancouver has moved to a more conservative mayor, more conservative party. His whole slate got on council, while outside of Vancouver, more progressive candidates have been voted in. And he says this points to a shift in the population.
And I think that might be related to demographic changes. We've seen a lot of young people leave the city, moving out into the distant suburbs to find more affordable housing, leaving sort of an older guard back in Vancouver. It wasn't that long ago that Vancouver families used to drive out to the Fraser Valley to visit grandma and grandpa, and now families are driving into Vancouver to visit grandma and grandpa. And I think that that may have had an impact on the electoral outcomes we saw both in Vancouver and in the wider Lower Mainland region.
And of course, that shift is something that will be watched by politicians at all levels. Of course, those shifting demographics can play in at elections on the federal and the provincial level as well.
Okay, let's talk more specifically about Vancouver and Surrey. Why did we see changes there?
Yeah, in the case of Vancouver, a lot of it did have to do with crime and the issues around policing. A lot of recent random violent attacks on the streets were played up by Ken Sim. The police union here broke tradition, actually supported him. He is promising 100 new police officers, 100 new mental health nurses as well, to bring back the school liaison officer for the VPD in the school. So this was an issue he hammered home throughout this campaign. Clearly, it did resonate with voters. He did also talk about the housing issue, which is, of course, at play here very much so, increasing the speed in which permits can be issued for new developments. But crime was one of the issues that did play up quite high in this election. And in Surrey, it was also a case of policing. Brenda Locke has come in promising to stop what previous Mayor Doug McCallum had started, which was transition away from the RCMP to the Surrey Police Service. She insists that that transition can still be stopped. There are already officers on the ground for the Surrey Police Service, but she insists, she has spoken to the federal minister already about this issue, that there are officers who can be brought back into the RCMP or elsewhere. So she insists that that can still happen and will happen. Of course, issues around costs and what exactly that is going to involve are things now she is going to have to deal with. She does have a half of council. She has a tie-breaking vote on council, so that comes into play. But for her and for Ken Sim and all of the other new mayors who've made a lot of promises in the campaign, of course, what begins now is actually turning those things into action.
Okay, CBC's Susana De Silva in Vancouver, thank you.